been writing letters to each other, and in the letters you wrote, "I'm attracted to females and females only."
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Like someone as yourself. You're female. You're very attractive.
Thank you. I don't think we need to get into that. Why is it important for you that you tell this version of events?
Because that's what actually happened that night.
The testimony begins not with forensic details, not with the crime scene, but with a gentle, vague statement as if recalling a past relationship. Harlem, August 2013. The late summer air still lingers on the bustling streets. People are out on the streets. Music blares from apartment windows, cars drive by, people laugh and talk. A night like any other. But that night, a girl named Islan Nettles walked out of her house like any other and never came back. Islan was 21, true to herself, passionate about fashion, loving beauty, and once dreamed of starting her own brand. She was a girl, a friend, a part of a community she was trying to belong to. But what really happened that night? Why did a moment on the street change everything? On the other side of the conversation, a young man was telling the story not in panic, but in broken sentences, mixed with confusion and evasion. Maybe he was just trying to make sense of something he couldn't face. But for Islan, and for those who have overcome fear to live, it was no longer a conversation. That's where all the questions began. On the evening of August 17, 2013, in the Harlem area in northern Manhattan, New York, the atmosphere was still bustling as usual. Around midnight, a group of 3 young women were walking along Frederick Douglass Avenue, near the corner of 148th Street. Among them was Islan Nettles, 21, a former fashion designer who lived nearby with his mother and younger brother. At the same time, a group of young men were standing and chatting near Jackie Robinson Park, just around the corner. Among the group was James Dixon, 20, a resident of Harlem who would later be identified as being directly involved in the incident. The moment the two groups met was completely coincidental. According to Dixon's later testimony, he and his friends were trying to strike up a conversation and laugh with Islan's group of friends. Neither side had any previous conflicts, nor did they know each other. Public space, late summer night, the crowd gradually thinned out. Only a few scattered groups remained nearby. From the published data, it can be determined that a short exchange took place between some people in the two groups. During that process, according to what Dixon later admitted, he had a conversation with Islan without knowing much about her. The atmosphere initially seemed comfortable, but quickly turned tense when some gossip from Dixon's friends appeared. This was an unexpected turn of events that night. The specific time of the incident was recorded as around 11:45 p.m., according to estimates from the investigation records. At this point, both Islan's group of friends and those standing nearby became direct witnesses to the chain of events that followed. The incident happened quite quickly, but not without witnesses. Some people in the area heard the commotion and stepped closer to observe. However, since this was a densely populated residential area, at night, no one thought it would be a serious incident. It is worth noting that the public surveillance camera in the area where the incident occurred was broken at the time, making the investigation difficult later. However, some witnesses in Islan's group of friends provided valuable information about the situation before the incident happened. There was no sign that Islan or her friends knew in advance or realized any danger. It all happened on a seemingly normal evening, without any forecast, without any warning. Just a summer night, a familiar street corner where people still meet, laugh, and then go home. But this time, things did not end like that. The incident occurred at approximately 11:45 p.m. on August 17, 2013, at the intersection of Frederick Douglass Avenue and 148th Street in Harlem, New York. As the incident ended in a split second, the atmosphere at the scene quickly changed. The initial sounds of laughter and scattered conversations from a few groups of people suddenly became silent. An eerie void enveloped the neighborhood as if time had stopped for a moment. The first to react was one of Islan Nettles' friends. She immediately realized that something was wrong. At that moment, there was no mistake. Her first reflex was to call her friend's name, then seek help from those around her. In the slight chaos, a few people began to approach, including those who were not involved in the previous two groups. A call to 911 was made just a few minutes later. Although the details have never been made public, records show that this call was crucial in getting emergency responders to the scene. The estimated time of the call was between 11:50 and 11:52 p.m., just minutes after the incident. The local police and paramedics arrived within 5 to 7 minutes. This is a densely populated area, so law enforcement officers frequently patrol the area. When they arrived, they were directed by people standing around the scene. One of the paramedics went first to assess the victim's initial condition, while the police officers cordoned off the area, maintained order, and questioned those present. Islan Nettles was still at the scene. She was not lost, nor did she move from her position. Everything remained as it was until the ambulance crew arrived and performed the necessary first aid. There was no recording equipment in the immediate area, as public cameras were reported to be inoperative, so eyewitness accounts became the most important source of information for reconstructing the initial events. The police presence also meant that information began to trickle into the reporting system. The atmosphere around the scene was described as noticeably subdued, with many locals watching from a distance, not fully understanding what was happening at the time. Some began whispering, others remained silent. The arrival of police cars and ambulances brought an abrupt halt to the otherwise noisy Harlem summer night. And while no one knew the full extent of the incident, one thing was becoming clear. This was no isolated incident. Something much bigger had happened and would continue for days to come. In the early morning hours of August 18, 2013, the intersection of Frederick Douglass Boulevard and 148th Street, where the incident occurred the night before, was still cordoned off by police. The scene had been left untouched since the first responders arrived at around midnight, allowing for an investigation. However, a major obstacle quickly emerged. The public security camera system in the area was not operational at the time of the incident. This meant that there was no live video recording of the entire incident. For the police, this was a serious shortcoming, as the area was frequently visited by people, and the lack of visual material forced them to rely entirely on witness accounts and physical evidence. The scene left few traces that could be collected. This was a normal street, not in an isolated area or with many hidden spots. According to the report, several personal items identified as belonging to the victim were recovered for forensic examination. There were no signs of major disturbances in the immediate area, indicating that the incident occurred over a short period of time and at the same location. That same day, Islan Nettles was transferred to Harlem Hospital in critical condition. Despite intensive care, she fell into a deep coma. After 5 days of treatment, her family agreed to discontinue life support measures on August 22, 2013. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office performed an autopsy shortly thereafter. The official autopsy report, released the following week, confirmed the cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head. The death was classified as a homicide. Although the report did not provide further details, the results from the medical examiner's office were the main basis for the police to redirect their investigation. In a case without any recorded images, every line from the forensic report becomes an important clue, not only to finding the person involved, but also to understanding what really happened in that brief moment in the middle of a summer night. The official investigation was launched immediately after the forensic report determined the cause of death and classified the incident as a criminal act. However, the process of solving the case did not proceed as quickly as expected. Although the victim was identified, the specific location and time were clear. The lack of surveillance camera images forced the police to rely almost entirely on witness accounts and peripheral details. In the early days, the police detained a suspect who was present at the scene at the time of the incident. However, after carefully checking the statement, time, and personal characteristics, this person was determined to have no direct involvement. This incident not only caused public confusion, but also put the investigation force under increasing pressure when the seemingly clear case fell into a deadlock. On August 20, 2013, just 3 days after the incident, a young man named James Dixon turned himself in at the 32nd Precinct in Harlem. However, for nearly 2 years, no formal charges were filed. Dixon turning himself in did not mean a full admission, and in the early stages, the police did not have enough legal grounds to file charges. This led to numerous memorials held by the victim's family and the LGBTQ+ community, putting pressure on the authorities to speed up the investigation. It was not until March 3, 2015, nearly 19 months after the incident, that the police officially issued an arrest warrant for James Dixon. Dixon was then 24 years old. He was charged with 3 counts: first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and first-degree assault. The arrest was made at Dixon's residence in Harlem, with the cooperation of the Interagency Investigation Team. One of the most important parts of the case is the video recording of Dixon's testimony, which lasted about an hour and 10 minutes. During the interrogation, James Dixon gave 2 statements with many inconsistent points. In the first statement, he said that his behavior was the result of an unspecified, spontaneous situation. However, in the second statement, after being questioned more deeply, he began to mention discriminatory details related to his personal reaction to a gender-conscious event. Dixon said that he and a group of friends approached 3 women in the area where the incident occurred. According to the statement, the conversation initially went normally, but when one of the friends realized something and started teasing, Dixon said he felt out of control and acted rashly. The interrogator repeatedly emphasized the inconsistencies in the statement, questioning whether anyone influenced or incited him to confess. Dixon denied the allegations and said he had only heard gossip from people in the neighborhood after the incident, which affected his interpretation of what had happened. Where the investigation took a sharp turn was when prosecutors assessed the value of the video testimony. Although there was no physical evidence of the crime scene, the interrogation room recording showed enough consistency to be considered a valid basis for a charge. Forensic experts analyzed the suspect's reaction to the testimony, which showed that there was an element of personal emotional trauma that led to his out-of-control behavior. Although not expressed directly in words, the long pauses, evasive answers, and constant changes in details highlighted the underlying content of the testimony, a defensive reaction to social prejudice and personal ego. After synthesizing the testimony, witnesses, forensic reports, and expert assessments, the case was completed and sent to the court for prosecution. On March 5, 2015, Dixon appeared in Manhattan District Court for his first hearing. Although he pleaded not guilty at the time, the videotaped testimony and psychological analysis began to be released, becoming the centerpiece of the entire case. The case had been slow going, but it was from the pivotal moments in the interrogation that the law enforcement agencies had a solid approach. Dixon's self-deception didn't make the case any simpler, but it was his telling of the story, not in denial but in confusion and uncertainty, that helped reveal what the physical evidence couldn't prove. There were no crime scene cameras, no visual witnesses, but the 70-minute videotape from the interrogation room, with its voices, eyes, and pauses, became the key piece of evidence that helped build the case. It is not just a confessional record, but also a psychological map, showing the breaks between personal perception and social reality, between what people want to believe and what happened. In March 2016, nearly 3 years after that fateful night in Harlem, the trial entered a pivotal phase. On March 17, at a press conference in court, James Dixon's attorney announced that he would not accept the 12-year prison deal that the prosecution had proposed, meaning that the defendant would appear in court for the full trial. Judge Robert Stahl stressed that if convicted after trial, the sentence could be as high as 25 years. The trial officially began in early April. On April 19, 2016, after a cross-examination and a report from the prosecution, James Dixon pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. This is the maximum sentence for manslaughter but not premeditated murder. The prosecutor asserted that, although there was no evidence of motive from the start, the act was still a serious crime because the knowledge that the victim was transgender could have contributed to the defendant's decisive reaction. The jury returned a final verdict. James Dixon was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Although the prosecutor had asked for a higher sentence of 17 years, the court stuck to 12 years after negotiations between the prosecution and the defendant. Outside the courtroom, sentiments were evident in simple but emotional words. Islan Nettles, Islan's sister, said in a choked voice, "12 years is not enough because he can go home. My sister can't go home, it's not fair." Those words echoed as a heartbreaking testament that, even if justice is achieved, the loss is irreparable. The public also watched the trial with anticipation. Some people reacted that the sentence was too light, not commensurate with the severity of the case. In addition, many LGBTQ+ activists affirmed that the trial was a step forward, albeit belated, showing that cases involving transgender people should also be taken seriously in the legal system. On August 22, 2013, Islan Nettles took her last breath after 5 days in hospital. Her family lost a daughter, her friends lost a companion, and her community lost a voice that was slowly taking shape in a world that is not easily accepting of differences. Islan's story ended not only with a verdict, but also left a void that time could not fill. Nearly 3 years later, in April 2016, the case closed with a 12-year sentence for the defendant. But the pain did not end with the trial. Those who loved Islan still go through each day with the memory of a young girl who dreamed of opening a fashion brand, who confidently lived her true self in a city that was sometimes still reserved about diversity. This case reminded not only a family, but also society, that the law needs to go further in protecting vulnerable communities, that humanity should not be limited by prejudice, and that vigilance is not just about others but sometimes about the silences that persist in society. The Islan Nettles case is legally closed, but the question remains, when will being true to yourself no longer be a trade-off?